They told me to leave with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. But what they didn't know was that the very night they shut the door on me, I discovered a kind of wealth they could never understand. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of getting rich. It's about how I found the courage to live life on my own terms. My name is Naomi Carter, and I turned 32 this past spring. If you had asked me to describe myself in a single word, I think I would have said steady. My father would have said the same thing, though, with a certain kind of pride in his voice. For him, being steady meant knowing your place in the world and not making waves. It meant doing what was expected, what was safe, what was respectable. And for a long time I tried my best to live up to that definition. I work in finance. I've spent years carefully stacking up numbers and paperwork, balancing other people's dreams while mine sat untouched. It was never what I wanted, but it was what my parents called a real job. My father, Walter Carter, loved to tell me that a steady paycheck and a predictable life were the keys to earning respect. My mother, Lillian, would simply nod along, her smile gentle, but her silence saying everything I needed to hear. They raised me to believe that stability was more important than happiness. And so I learned to nod along, too, to file away my questions and quiet the restlessness that pulsed beneath my skin. My father's approval was always just out of reach, and my mother's soft, worried eyes never seemed to meet mine long enough to understand what I was really feeling. My younger brother Eli was the opposite of me in almost every way. At 26, he already had a corner office at a marketing firm in the city. My parents called him the future of the family, and at family dinners it was as if the world revolved around his newest client or project. I would listen politely, offering the occasional supportive comment, but the table might as well have been a stage where Eli shone and the rest of us played supporting roles. In those moments I felt invisible. I could have been anyone. Any quiet, reliable daughter in any respectable suburban home. My father would still pour Eli another glass of wine, would still brag to family friends about his promotions and bonuses. My mother would still beam the way she always did, as if every one of Eli's accomplishments was another trophy for the family mantle. I was the older sister, the dependable one, the one who never needed rescuing or special attention. My father liked to say that he never had to worry about me. Naomi's solid, he would tell his friends, and they would nod in approval. But what he really meant was that I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to stay out of the way. What they never really saw, what I learned to keep hidden, was that I had a passion for creating things. I didn't want to just file papers or balance budgets. I wanted to make things with my hands, to feel the slip of clay between my fingers, to bring something into the world that had never existed before. My grandmother, Ida Monroe, was the only person who ever truly saw that part of me. Grandma Ida had a way of making even the smallest moment feel like magic. She used to say that there was nothing more beautiful than shaping something with your own hands. When I was little, she would let me sit at the kitchen table with her, showing me how to knead dough, or mold bits of clay she kept in a small wooden box. "The world needs more beauty, Naomi," she'd say, her voice soft and sure. "Don't be afraid to leave your mark." After she passed away, she left me two things: a battered leather-bound notebook she called her recipes for happiness, and a wooden crate filled with her pottery tools. They were worn and nicked with years of use, but to me they felt like treasure. I kept them hidden in my bedroom closet like a secret, something too fragile to bring into the harsh light of my father's expectations. When the pandemic hit, I moved back in with my parents to save money. I told myself it was practical. I told myself it was temporary. But as the weeks turned into months and the world outside fell silent, I found myself slipping back into the quiet role I had always played at home. My father's lectures about stability became a constant soundtrack. My mother's careful smiles were a silent reminder to keep my head down. But at night, when the house was dark and my family was asleep, I would slip away to the small corner of my childhood bedroom I had claimed for myself. There I would unpack Grandma's old tools and let my hands remember what it felt like to create. The cool weight of the clay, the gentle curve of a bowl forming beneath my palms. It was like coming home to a part of myself I had almost forgotten. I started sharing photos of my pieces online, under a name that no one in my family would recognize. It felt risky, almost rebellious, but also like the smallest flicker of something I had lost long ago, hope. In those quiet hours, I was no longer the daughter who always did what she was told. I was the woman I had dreamed of being when I was a little girl sitting at my grandmother's table. No one else in my family knew. They didn't need to. This was mine. My small, fragile piece of freedom. And as I sat there in the glow of a single candle, I realized that even though I had spent most of my life learning to be steady, there was something else inside me. Something that didn't want to be steady at all. It wanted to be seen. It wanted to be heard, and most of all, it wanted to be free. The decision to finally share my dream with my family came on a Tuesday night, the kind of evening that felt both heavy and hopeful. I had spent the whole day going over every detail in my head, my business plan, my financial projections, the costs of the studio space I had been quietly researching for months. I had even made color-coded charts like the ones I used at work to show how serious I was about this next step. I wanted to prove to them, and maybe to myself, that this wasn't a whim or a childish fantasy. It was a real plan, something I had built with care and intention. I chose that night because everyone was home. My father was in his usual chair, reading the paper with his glasses perched low on his nose. My mother was in the kitchen finishing up the dishes while Eli sat at the table scrolling through his phone. I cleared my throat softly as I stepped into the room, my heart beating so loudly that I was sure they could all hear it. "I have something I'd like to talk about," I said, my voice calm but firm. My father looked up, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. My mother paused, her hands still in the soapy water, and Eli glanced up, offering me an encouraging half-smile. "I've been working on a plan." I continued, holding up the folder I had spent weeks preparing. "I want to open my own ceramics studio. I've done the research, and I have a clear path forward. I'm going to leave my job in finance and finally make this happen." For a moment, the room was silent. My father's eyes narrowed behind his glasses. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Eli set his phone down, his expression turning serious. My father was the first to speak. "Naomi," he said, his tone low and deliberate. "This is a mistake. A hobby is not a career. You're talking about throwing away a perfectly good job for what?" "Playing with clay." "It's not just playing," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I've been working on this for years. I have orders lined up already, people interested in buying my pieces. This is what I want to build my life around." He shook his head, the kind of slow, dismissive shake that told me he had already made up his mind. "This isn't practical. It's not responsible. You're old enough to know better." I looked to my mother, hoping she might at least understand how much this meant to me. But she just stood there, her hands still in the water, eyes downcast. When she finally met my gaze, there was something like sorrow there, but no words of support. No soft reassurance that she saw me, or that she believed in what I was trying to do. Eli cleared his throat. "Naomi, I think it's great that you have something you're passionate about," he said carefully. "But maybe it's not the right time. You know how hard it is to start a business. Maybe you could keep doing it on the side for a while longer, just until you're more secure." Secure. That word cut deeper than he knew. Secure meant safe. It meant small. It meant living in the lines they had all drawn for me. I took a breath, forcing my shoulders to stay straight even though I wanted to crumble. "I know it's a risk," I said, "but I've spent my whole life doing what was expected. I've saved enough to get started. I've run the numbers and I can make this work." My father let out a short, bitter laugh. "Running the numbers isn't the same as reality, Naomi. You're talking about a dream, not a job. And I won't stand by and watch you ruin your life chasing something that doesn't make sense. I wanted to shout that it did make sense, that I had spent nights poring over costs and revenue streams, that I had a list of suppliers and a plan for every penny. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't listening. He was waiting for me to give up and fall back in line. I tried one more time, turning to my mother. "Mom, don't you see? This is my chance to do something that feels like mine. I don't want to wake up at 50 and realize I never even tried." She pressed her lips together, glancing at my father before she spoke. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said softly. "It's hard enough to build a life. You don't need to make it harder." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It was like the walls I had spent years carefully maintaining were starting to crack, and the truth was finally shining through. I didn't need them to approve. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them to let me try. But that wasn't what I got. My father stood setting his paper down with a sharp thud. "If you're serious about this," he said, his voice turning cold, "then you need to understand something. You either keep your job and forget this nonsense, or you find somewhere else to live. I won't support this fantasy." It was a line in the sand, drawn with the kind of finality I had always feared. No room for discussion, no chance to explain what this meant to me. Just a demand that I choose safety or freedom. As I stood there clutching the folder to my chest, I realized that this wasn't about practicality or security. It was about control. About whether I was willing to keep living a life that felt like someone else's idea of who I should be. I turned and walked back to my room, my hands trembling as I shut the door behind me. And when I opened my desk drawer to put my folder away, I found my journal lying on top of my papers, open to the page where I had written down every hope, every fear, every fragile dream I had dared to put into words. They had read it. My father, my mother. Someone had opened it, flipped through the pages that were supposed to be mine alone. I felt the betrayal like a physical ache in my chest. I wasn't a child anymore. I didn't need their permission. And if they couldn't see that, then maybe it was time I finally showed them. The rain started falling just as my father's words finished echoing in the hallway. I didn't even have time to argue or plead. There was no space for anything except the sudden weight of finality. I packed in a daze, pulling clothes and a few precious things from my shelves while my mother hovered in the doorway, her mouth a thin line of worry that never formed into words. My father stood downstairs, silent but immovable, as if he had already moved on to the next item on his mental checklist. I walked down the stairs with a single suitcase, its wheels squeaking softly against the worn carpet. My mother reached for me, her hand almost brushing my shoulder, but she let it fall back to her side. Eli was nowhere to be seen. Maybe that was better. I didn't want to see the uncertainty in his eyes, didn't want him to offer apologies he didn't mean. The door closed behind me with a dull thud that sounded too final for my liking. Outside, the night was cold and wet, the rain coming down in sheets that plastered my hair to my face within seconds. I stood there on the porch, gripping the handle of my suitcase, feeling the weight of it in my hand, and the even heavier weight of everything I was leaving behind. I tried calling a few friends, people I thought I could count on, but one was out of town for work, another said she was staying with family for the holidays, and a third didn't even pick up. Each polite, "I'm sorry," and awkward silence on the other end of the line made the loneliness settle deeper in my chest. I had always been the one who showed up when people needed help, the one who said yes when no one else would. But now when I needed someone, there was only the cold rain and the sound of my own breath. Eventually I stopped trying. I pulled up the hood of my coat even though it was already soaked through and started walking. The suitcase rattled along behind me as I trudged down the quiet suburban streets, each step feeling both liberating and terrifying. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. After what felt like an hour of wandering, I spotted a flickering neon sign that read, "Evergreen Motel." The place looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in decades, but the vacancy sign glowed red and steady in the darkness. I stood under the awning for a moment, water dripping down the back of my neck, and took a shaky breath. This wasn't where I imagined my new beginning would start, but at least it was somewhere dry. The woman behind the front desk was older, her gray hair pulled back into a loose bun, and her eyes kind but guarded. She didn't ask questions when she saw me standing there dripping and shivering with a single suitcase in hand. "Rough night, Han," she said softly. I could only nod. She handed me a room key with a small, reassuring smile. "Number 7. It's nothing fancy, but the heater works." Inside the room, the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and old carpet, but it was warm. I dropped my suitcase at the foot of the bed and sat down heavily, staring at the thin curtains that flapped gently in the draft from the window. My wet clothes clung to my skin, and for a moment I just let myself feel it all. The fear, the anger, the small flickering sense of relief that at least here no one could tell me who I had to be. I closed my eyes and thought of Grandma Ida. Her voice, always so sure and steady, seemed to echo in the quiet of the room. Happiness doesn't come from making everyone else happy, Naomi. It comes from making something that matters to you. I let the words settle in my chest like an anchor grounding me, even as the rest of my world felt like it was falling apart. I whispered to myself, "No matter what happens, I won't let anyone take this from me. Not again." I changed into dry clothes and wrapped myself in the scratchy motel blanket. The rain tapped gently against the window, a soft percussion that felt almost like a lullaby. My phone buzzed once, a message from my father's number that I didn't bother to open. I turned it face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by dreams of my mother's sad eyes and my father's harsh voice. When I finally woke, the room was still dark except for the pale glow of my phone screen. I reached for it automatically, and that's when I remembered the lottery ticket. It was a small ritual I had shared with Grandma Ida. Every Friday we'd buy a ticket together, laughing at how silly it was, but also at how it made us feel like maybe the world still held surprises. After she died, I kept playing more out of habit than hope. It was something that felt like a tether to her, a small promise that magic was still possible even in the most practical of lives. I opened the lottery app almost on autopilot, my thumb hovering over the check numbers button. I told myself it would be nothing. Just another losing ticket, another small secret moment to let go of. But when the numbers appeared on the screen, my breath caught in my throat. They matched. Every single number. My grandmother's numbers. For a moment I thought it must be a mistake. I closed the app and opened it again. The numbers were still there, unwavering and perfect. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might be sick. I looked around the shabby motel room at the sagging bed and the faded curtains and felt like I had stepped into someone else's life. I didn't feel joy at first, just shock and almost disbelieving wonder that something like this could happen to someone like me. The fear came next. What did this mean? What would I do? But underneath it all there was something else. A quiet, steady pulse of something that felt like freedom. In that small, dark room with the rain still falling outside and my entire life packed into one battered suitcase, I realized that maybe this was my second chance. My chance to choose who I wanted to be. Not the daughter who always said yes, not the steady worker who never complained, but the woman my grandmother had always believed I could become. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the universe was giving me permission to start over. The first rays of dawn crept through the thin motel curtains, painting the faded walls with a soft, tentative light. I had barely slept at all. My mind kept spinning around the same impossible truth: I had won the lottery. In the quiet of that cramped room, the idea felt almost unreal, like a half-remembered dream I was afraid to believe in too fully. I needed to tell someone who wasn't family, someone who could help me figure out what to do next. My hands were still shaking when I knocked on the door to the front office just after sunrise. Ruth Harlow, the motel owner, looked up from the battered ledger she'd been writing in, her eyes soft and kind beneath her lined forehead. "Couldn't sleep, Hon. she asked, her voice low and warm like a morning cup of coffee. I shook my head, too overwhelmed to find the words. Ruth didn't push. She just closed the book and gestured for me to sit down in the battered armchair by the window. For a moment, I hesitated. I had learned too well how people could take your dreams and twist them into something you didn't recognize. But Ruth had been kind to me when she didn't have to. She had given me a place to stay when I was at my lowest. I took a deep breath and told her everything. She listened without interruption, her expression never flickering with disbelief or greed. When I finished, she let out a long, slow breath and said, "That's a hell of a thing, Naomi. But let me tell you something. Money doesn't change who you are. It just makes you more of it." Her words settled in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the quiet strength in the lines of her face. I don't know what to do. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I don't understand. Ruth gave a small, wry smile. "I know someone who might be able to help you," she said. "My cousin Miles. He's a financial advisor, the kind who knows how to keep things quiet. You can trust him. Trust." It was a word I wasn't sure I believed in anymore, but I nodded anyway. Ruth pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory, speaking in that calm, steady voice of hers that made me feel like maybe I wasn't so alone after all. Miles White showed up that afternoon. He was younger than I expected, late 30s, with a calm, watchful gaze and a quiet confidence that made me feel like he'd seen everything and still managed to keep his own counsel. We sat at the small motel table, the light from the window catching the gray at his temples as he flipped through the stack of paperwork he'd brought. "I'm going to be honest with you, Naomi," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This isn't something you want to handle alone. You have options, but the first thing we need to do is protect your privacy. If this becomes public, you'll have every long-lost relative and half-forgotten friend knocking on your door." I swallowed hard, thinking of my father's calculating eyes and my mother's worried silence. "I don't want them to know," I said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Miles nodded. "We can set up a blind trust. It's the safest way to claim the winnings anonymously. That way the money is legally yours, but your name stays out of the spotlight." As he explained the details, trust documents, tax implications, carefully managed investments, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in days: control. For so long I had let other people shape my life. Now, for the first time, I had the chance to decide for myself. Ruth stayed close by, sitting quietly in the corner, her knitting needles clicking softly as Miles and I talked. When we took a break, she leaned over and squeezed my hand. "You know," she said softly, "when I got divorced 10 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything. My husband made the money and I made the home. When it all fell apart, I didn't know who I was without him." I looked at her, surprised by the openness in her voice. "But you're still here," I said. "You own this place." She laughed, a low, rich sound that warmed the small room. "Yeah, it's not much, but it's mine. That's the thing about money, Naomi. It doesn't make you someone new. It just gives you the space to figure out who you really are." Her words sank deep into my bones. I thought about the years I had spent trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect employee, the one who never asked for too much. I had told myself that was what being steady meant. But now I wondered if I'd been mistaking steadiness for silence. As Miles packed up his folders and promised to start the paperwork first thing in the morning, I felt a small, stubborn ember of resolve start to glow in my chest. This wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the chance to choose my own life, to shape it the way I shaped the clay in my studio, with care and intention. Later that night, as the rain started again outside my motel window, I lay awake listening to the steady patter on the roof. My mind was still spinning with everything that had happened, but underneath the chaos there was a quiet clarity. I whispered the question to myself in the dark. Am I running away, or am I finally free? The answer was a secret I wasn't sure of yet, But for the first time in years, it felt like the question was mine alone to ask, and that I thought might be the beginning of everything. 2 weeks after that fateful night, I found myself standing in the empty doorway of a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, just a one-bedroom with creaky floorboards and a single window that looked out onto a sleepy street lined with sycamores. But to me it was freedom. It was the first place I had ever chosen entirely for myself. I remember the first time I turned the key in the lock. The door swung open with a soft groan, as if the apartment was stretching awake after years of waiting. The walls were painted a gentle cream color, and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to ask anyone's opinion about the place. My father's voice wasn't in my ear offering critiques or concerns. My mother's soft sighs didn't haunt the corners. It was just me, and the quiet, giddy thrill of knowing I had finally stepped into my own story. I spent the next few days choosing things for the apartment: a small couch in a warm shade of mustard yellow, a set of mismatched dishes from a local thrift shop that made me smile every time I opened the cupboard. Each choice felt like an act of rebellion and an act of love all at once. I wasn't buying things just because they were practical or because they would impress anyone else. I was buying them because they felt right to me. The most important purchase, though, was the set of professional ceramic tools I ordered online. It arrived in a plain cardboard box, and as I carefully unwrapped each tool, I felt like I was unwrapping a promise I had made to myself. The wooden ribs, the metal trimming tools, the sponge, and the wire cutter. Each one a small testament to the life I was building with my own hands. I traced my fingers over the smooth handles, whispering softly, "This is for you, Naomi. This is yours." Of course, there was fear, too. Fear that maybe this was all just luck, that the money would slip through my fingers like water, and I would be left with nothing but dreams and bills I couldn't pay. But when those thoughts started to creep in, I would close my eyes and think of Grandma Ida. I remembered the first time she showed me how to center clay on the wheel, her hands steady and sure as she guided mine. "It's not about fighting the clay," she said, her voice calm and certain. "It's about listening to it, about giving it the space to become what it wants to be." I carried those words with me now, holding them like a charm against the uncertainty. And on the third day after I moved in, I woke early and brewed a pot of coffee in my tiny kitchen. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky outside my window in soft hues of rose and gold. I sat at the small table by the window, the steam from my coffee curling in the morning air, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years: hope. I thought of Ruth Harlow, the woman who had offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to turn. I remembered the warmth of her quiet strength, the way she had listened without judgment. I knew that before I spent a single dollar on myself, I needed to repay her kindness. I called her that morning. My voice shook as I said, "Ruth, I'd like to pay off the mortgage on the motel. I want to make sure you and this place are safe." For a moment there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then Ruth let out a long, trembling breath. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've already given me more hope than I've had in years." "I want to." I told her, my words steady and clear. "You gave me a place to land when the world felt like it was falling apart. Let me do this for you." Later that afternoon, I sat in my new living room, the cardboard boxes still stacked in corners, and felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over me. This was my first act as the woman I was becoming. Not the daughter who always followed the rules, not the employee who kept her head down, but Naomi Carter, a woman who knew how to honor both her dreams and the people who had believed in her when she had nothing else. As I unpacked my new tools, I could almost feel Grandma Ida's hands on my shoulders, steady and warm. I could hear her laughter, soft and sure, as she watched me take this leap into the unknown. And I knew deep in my bones that this wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a chance to shape my life with the same care and intention I gave to every piece of clay. Ma'am, While might on something to and say. I wasn't running away anymore. I was choosing. And that choice, I realized, was the most powerful thing I had ever done. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Eli showed up at my new apartment. I had just finished arranging a new shelf of handmade vases by the window, each one unique in its curves and glazes, each one a testament to the new life I was building. I heard his hesitant knock before I saw him. 3 short taps that carried both hope and uncertainty. When I opened the door, Eli stood there in his carefully pressed slacks and a tie that looked too formal for a visit to his sister. He held a coffee cup in one hand, shifting it back and forth like he wasn't sure whether to offer it to me or keep it as a shield. "Hey, Naomi," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." I let him in, motioning toward the small dining table by the window. He glanced around, his eyes sweeping over the cozy apartment, the warm colors, and the quiet beauty of the pottery that now filled the space. He looked like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the big sister who had always played it safe, but as someone who had found her own way. "It's nice," he said finally, his words feeling too small for the wonder in his eyes. "Really nice." I just smiled and said, "It's mine." There was a pause, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Eli cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "You look different," he said. "Happier, maybe." He didn't say what he really wanted to know, and I didn't offer it. I could see the questions flickering behind his careful expression. "How did you do it? Where did this come from?" But I wasn't ready to give him those answers. "I'm doing okay." I told him, my voice calm and even. "You don't have to worry about me anymore, Eli. I've got this." He nodded, his fingers tapping the side of his coffee cup. "I'm glad," he said, but his voice was tinged with something like regret. "I always knew you were more than what they saw." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever hear from him, and for now it was enough. A week later, my parents showed up unannounced. I heard the buzz of the intercom, and then my father's deep voice crackling through Naomi. "It's us. Can we come up?" I hesitated for a moment, my heart thudding in my chest, before pressing the button to let them in. They stepped into the apartment together, my father's eyes immediately scanning the space with the same critical precision he used to read quarterly reports. My mother's gaze was softer, but no less searching, her hands clasped tightly in front of her like she was holding herself together. "It's nice," she said, echoing Eli's words. My father nodded, his mouth a thin line as he took in the evidence of my new life. Shelves lined with my pottery, the small table with fresh flowers, the faint scent of earth and clay that seemed to cling to the air. But there was no apology in their eyes, no hint of regret for the night they told me to leave with nothing but a suitcase and a battered heart. My father's voice was the first to break the silence. "Naomi," he said, his tone even, and measured, "How did you do this? How did you afford all this?" I looked at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of every unspoken word between us. I thought of the years I had spent trying to be the daughter he wanted, the nights I had stayed awake, wondering if I would ever be enough. And in that moment I realized that I didn't owe him anything, not an explanation, not a defense, not even my anger. "I don't owe anyone an explanation," I said quietly. "I only owe it to myself to be who I really am." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. My father opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. There was a kind of finality in the air, a quiet truth that didn't need to be spoken. I took a slow breath and gestured for them to follow me. "Come with me," I said. "I want to show you something." I led them down the street to my studio, a small storefront with warm wooden floors, and a sign in the window that read, "Ida's Hands," my tribute to the grandmother who had always believed in me. The space was bright and filled with light, the shelves lined with pieces I had shaped with my own hands, each one carrying a piece of the journey I had walked to get here. My parents stood in the doorway, their eyes wide as they took it all in. I watched them as they moved slowly through the studio, their fingers brushing over the smooth rims of bowls, the delicate curves of vases. My father's face was unreadable, his usual composure slipping away for just a moment as he looked around. "This is impressive," he said finally, his voice low. My mother reached out to touch a small cup glazed in deep indigo, her fingers lingering like she was trying to understand how something so beautiful could have come from her daughter's hands. "I didn't bring you here for your approval," I said softly. "I wanted you to see me, really see me, for who I am now, not for who you always wanted me to be." They didn't say anything. Maybe they couldn't. But as I stood there, surrounded by the quiet testament of my own making, I realized that it didn't matter. This was my life, my choice, my voice, and whether they understood or not, I finally did. For the first time, I felt a quiet, unshakable peace. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't need their understanding. I had found something stronger, the courage to be myself, and that was more than enough. 3 months later, the sign above the door of my small studio read, "Ida's Hands." The name felt like both a promise and a prayer, my way of honoring the woman who had taught me that art was more than beauty, that it was a way to leave a piece of your heart in the world. The sign was simple, hand-painted with elegant looping letters, and every time I saw it, I felt a rush of quiet pride. The studio itself was everything I had ever dreamed of: exposed brick walls that caught the warm glow of the pendant lights I had hung. Myself shelves lined with the gentle curves of cups and bowls and vases, each one unique, each one born from my hands. There was a small wooden counter near the door where a tiny bell chimed whenever someone entered. And in the far corner, a display I had set up just for pieces that carried a special kind of memory, small imperfections that made them even more beautiful. I had hired 2 young women to help me, Ava and Maribel. They were both in their early 20s, both carrying stories of their own stories of being told they would never amount to anything more than what was expected of them. Watching them work their fingers, finding confidence in the soft, pliable clay, I felt a kind of kinship that I hadn't known I was missing. Here, in this small, sunlit space, we were all learning how to shape more than just clay. We were learning how to shape ourselves. Most days you could find me at the wheel, my hands and forearms streaked with earth as I coaxed each piece into being. The world outside faded away in those moments, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the wheel spinning beneath my palms, the cool slip of clay sliding between my fingers. My hair was always pulled back, wisps of it falling loose around my face, and though my clothes were usually dusted in fine white powder, I didn't care. Here no one asked me when I was going to settle down or how long I thought this phase would last. Here there was only the steady beat of creation, the quiet certainty that what we were doing mattered. Sometimes I would pause and look around the studio, taking in the laughter of Ava and Maribel as they compared notes on a new glazing technique, the way the light caught in the small imperfections of a freshly thrown mug. And in those moments, I would think, this is it. This is the life I was always meant to make. One afternoon, as I was carefully arranging new pieces on a display shelf near the window, a woman stepped in. She looked to be in her 60s, her silver hair swept back in a loose bun, and her eyes bright with curiosity. She paused by the shelf, her gaze lingering on a small, deep green vase I had finished just the night before. She picked it up, turning it slowly in her hands. "There's something alive in this," she said softly, almost to herself. She looked up at me, her eyes meeting mine. "It's like it has a soul." I felt my breath catch in my throat. No one in my family had ever said anything like that. No one had ever looked at something I made and seen more than an object, more than a hobby. In that moment, I realized that I didn't need anyone's permission to be proud of what I had built. I didn't need their validation to know that this was enough. After the woman left the little bell above the door chiming softly behind her, I sat for a long time at my workbench, my hands still covered in the soft dust of the morning's labor. I thought about the years I had spent trying to be what everyone else needed me to be, the years I had believed that my worth was measured in approval and expectations. But here in the quiet hum of the studio, surrounded by the gentle strength of these pieces and the laughter of the women who had become like family to me, I understood something deeper. Value wasn't something handed to me by my parents or my brother or anyone else who thought they knew better. It was something I claimed for myself, something that came alive in the act of creation and the choice to keep going, even when it was hard. I ran my hands over the smooth, cool rim of a new bowl, feeling the gentle pulse of my own heartbeat echo back through the clay. Here I thought no one tells me who to be. And in that simple truth, I found the freedom I had been chasing my entire life. I knew then without a shadow of a doubt that this wasn't just a shop or a studio. It was a home for the parts of me I had always been too afraid to share. And as the golden afternoon light poured in through the windows, I felt my grandmother's spirit in every corner, her quiet laughter in every breath I took. This was my life now. My own, finally and fully. And in every piece I shaped, in every crack and curve and careful line, I saw a reflection of the woman I had become whole, unafraid, and entirely my own. It was late on a Wednesday evening when my phone lit up with a call from my mother. The quiet of my apartment felt almost fragile as I stared at the screen, her name glowing there like a question I wasn't sure how to answer. Finally, I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hi, Mom," I said softly, my voice steady, even though my heart was already pounding. She didn't speak at first. I could hear her breathing, the small, shaky sound of someone trying to find the right words. "Naomi," she said at last, her voice trembling. "I don't know if you'll believe me, but I never meant to hurt you. I don't think I ever really understood how much I was asking you to be someone you're not." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. I thought of all the years I had tried to be the daughter she wanted. Calm, quiet, easy. The girl who never asked for too much, who never made waves. I had worn that role like a second skin for so long I had almost convinced myself it was who I really was. "I always thought of you as the one who didn't need so much." My mother continued, her voice breaking. "The one who was easy. I'm so sorry, Naomi. I didn't see how much that cost you." For a long moment I didn't answer. The silence between us felt different this time. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of all the things left unsaid, but something softer, something that felt like it might be a doorway instead of a wall. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, but firm. "I don't want to be easy anymore, Mom," I said. "I want to be real. I want to live the life that's true for me, even if it's not always convenient." I could hear her take a shaky breath. I think I'd like to see that life, Naomi," she said. "If you'll let me." We didn't say much more that night, but when I hung up the phone, I felt a small, careful kind of hope stirring in my chest. Maybe it wasn't too late for her to see me. Maybe it wasn't too late for both of us. A few days later, my parents and Eli came over for dinner. It was the first family meal we'd shared since everything changed. I had spent the whole afternoon preparing simple dishes that reminded me of childhood. Roast chicken with rosemary, a salad of fresh greens, a pie I had baked from scratch, my kitchen still dusted with flour. My father sat at the table with his usual posture of authority, his fingers drumming on the wood as he scanned the room. So he began almost as if we were in a board meeting instead of my small apartment. "Have you thought about how to invest your earnings? You should consider putting some of it into low-risk bonds or maybe a conservative mutual fund. That would be the smart move for long-term security." I looked at him for a moment and then I smiled, a small wry smile that felt like the gentlest kind of defiance. "I have invested it," I said calmly, "in myself." And so far it's the safest investment I've ever made." My father looked momentarily taken aback, his brow furrowing as he tried to find a counterpoint, but he said nothing. My mother sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her glass of water, her eyes soft and searching in a way that made my chest ache. She didn't say much that night, but every time she looked at me, I saw something different in her eyes, something that felt like the beginning of respect. Eli was the quietest of us all, watching the exchange with a kind of quiet wonder. For years, he had seen me as the sister who kept her head down, who never pushed back. But that night I saw a shift in him, a glimmer of recognition that maybe I wasn't just someone to be protected or pitied. Maybe I was someone who had chosen her own path, and that choice was something to be honored. After dinner, as we lingered around the table with our coffee cups, Eli leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a new kind of light in his eyes. "I've never seen you like this before," he said quietly, almost like he was talking to himself. "It suits you, Naomi." I didn't say anything in response. I just smiled, a small knowing smile that told him I was exactly where I was meant to be. The evening was quiet, without any dramatic confessions or sudden reconciliations. But as my parents gathered their coats to leave, my mother paused at the door. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her touch gentle and uncertain. "Thank you for dinner," she said softly. "And thank you for sharing this part of you with us." I watched them walk down the hallway, my father's arm around her shoulders, Eli following behind. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trying to fit into a family that didn't see me. I felt like I had invited them into my life on my own terms, and that was enough. As I turned back to my small kitchen, the dishes stacked in the sink, and the soft hum of the city outside my window, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I knew we still had a long way to go. There would be more conversations, more silences to navigate. But for now there was something new between us. Something tender and fragile, but real. I had stopped being the easy one. I had started being the honest one. And in that small, shining truth, I found a kind of acceptance I had never known before. One that didn't depend on anyone else but me. If you've ever felt the quiet ache of trying to be enough for everyone but yourself, I hope Naomi's story reminds you that you're allowed to be more than what others expect of you. Have you ever found the courage to step into your own truth? Even when it meant standing alone, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your stories. Let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below and share your experiences. And if this journey touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Together, we're building a space for voices that deserve to be heard, voices like yours.